Hey and hello! Do you know how to remember words? Let me tell you something interesting. In today's video, the secret I followed and learned about 3,000 new words, which made my English well and fluent. Every Wednesday, I wake up early and go to school. It's the same routine: brush my teeth, eat breakfast, pack my bag, and walk down the road while listening to soft English music on my phone. This week, something unusual happened in class. Just as our English teacher walked in, one of the most active students, Emma Watson, raised her hand with a curious look on her face. She had a notebook in front of her and a pencil in her hand. "Miss," she said politely, "I've started reading a lot more. I read books and articles and even write down difficult words. But I still have one problem. I forget those new words even after a few minutes." Everyone in the room nodded. They had the same issue. I looked around and noticed how even the best students looked a little confused. Our teacher smiled gently and said, "That's a beautiful question, Emma, and you're not the only one. In fact, forgetting new words is very common. Even native speakers sometimes forget words they don't use often. But don't worry. Let's talk about how memory works when it comes to language." She walked to the whiteboard and wrote the word remembering in big letters. "Now," she began, "let me tell you something surprising. Research shows that to truly remember a new word, you have to see it at least 5 times. And not just see it, but see it in different situations, like hearing it in a song, reading it in a book, saying it in a sentence, writing it down, and then maybe using it in real conversation." She continued, "Now think about verbs like appreciate, suppose, or believe. These are not just words. They are actions, feelings, or thoughts. These take longer to remember because your brain needs to understand how and when to use them. Some words may need to appear 10 to 15 times before they become a natural part of your speech. So don't feel upset when you forget a word. It just means your brain needs to meet it again." Everyone sat up straighter, ready to understand the mystery behind learning words. Then the teacher introduced something even more interesting. She said, "There are 5 stages of learning a word, and they are not magic. They are based on how the brain works." She began with the first stage, encounter. Imagine you're reading a story and come across the word grateful. You've never seen it before, so what do? You check the meaning, right? That's your first encounter. You understand the definition and move on. Then comes recognition. Now, maybe 2 days later, you see grateful again in a video or a caption. This time, it looks familiar. You think, "Oh, I saw this word before," but you're not sure what it means, so you check again. Next is guessing. By the 3rd or 4th time, when you see the word again, you try to guess the meaning from the context. Maybe the character in the story says, "I felt so grateful after the accident," and you guess it means something like happy or thankful. You're close, and that's a good sign. After that, you reach understanding. At this point, you know what grateful means. You don't need to check the dictionary anymore. But here's the catch. You still can't use it while talking. If someone asks you how you felt after winning a prize, you might say happy or good instead of grateful. even though you know the word exists. And finally comes mastery. Now, this is the moment you've been working toward, when someone asks you how you feel after a good experience, and without thinking, you say, "I feel so grateful." That's when you've truly learned the word. It has become part of your own language. The room was silent. We were all thinking about how many words we had left behind at the recognition stage and never brought to mastery. It wasn't because we were lazy or not smart. It was because we didn't meet those words enough times. And now we understood why. I looked down at my own notebook, where I had written words like determine, witness, admire, and perhaps. I had seen them before, maybe even used them once or twice in writing, but I still didn't say them aloud when speaking. I had not reached the mastery level. Suddenly, I felt less guilty and more curious. I wanted to meet those words again and again until they became part of me. The teacher told us that the best way to keep meeting new words was through stories, audio, conversations, and repetition. She said, "Don't just read the word once and forget it. Use it. Write a sentence. Make it part of your daily talk. Pretend you're using it in a movie or a real-life scene." That day, as class ended, I walked home and tried to recall the words from the lesson. I said them out loud. Grateful, admire, recognize, mastery. I said them while walking, like I was practicing a song. I even tried making funny sentences with them to help myself remember. I admire people who eat 5 bananas at once. Silly? Yes. But it helped me laugh and remember. And maybe that's what learning is, finding joy in repetition. That night, while scrolling through YouTube, I watched a short video where a girl shared her experience of forgetting words all the time. She had started making her own word storybook, where she added each new word with a small story or picture. The idea was creative, and I decided to do the same. I picked a few difficult words and made cartoons around them. For example, I drew a picture of a smiling boy giving his lunch to a friend and wrote under it, "He is grateful." Over the next few days, something started changing. I began to remember more words, not because I studied harder, but because I played with the words. I made them part of my world. I imagined them in conversations, wrote short dialogues with them, and even used them while texting friends. Soon, other classmates started joining in. One day, Jennifer Lopez, another student in our class, stood up and said, "Miss, I can remember words better now, but I still have a problem. I can read English, I can write it, but when people speak fast, I don't understand anything. It's like a train speeding by." Everyone laughed, but we all knew it was true. Listening to English felt like chasing a running car. You see it, but you can't catch up. That moment took our class in a new direction. Now that we understood how to remember words, the next challenge was how to understand spoken English. How to listen, not just hear. Our teacher looked around and said, "That's another beautiful question, Jennifer. Learning to listen is just as important as learning to speak. In fact, if you can't understand someone, how will you reply?" And just like that, our journey moved from remembering words to something even more exciting and equally important: the art of listening. This was our next step. This was where our path was leading. Because understanding words is good, but understanding spoken English is what brings those words to life. We were ready for the next phase, and our teacher was ready to guide us. But before we moved on, she gave us one last reminder. Words are not tools you store in a box. They are friends you invite into your life. The more often you meet them, the longer they'll stay. Improving your listening skills is crucial when learning a new language, especially when it comes to mastering English. It's one of the most important components of effective communication. If you can understand others clearly, you can respond more confidently, and this improves your overall language proficiency. The question of how to become better at listening isn't as simple as just listening more. It requires focus, the right strategies, and consistent practice. Listening goes beyond just hearing words. It's about understanding the context, tone, emotion, and even the cultural nuances behind what's being said. This is why it's important not just to listen to anything, but to choose the right material that will help you grow as a listener and an English speaker. One of the first things our teacher emphasized was how vital listening is to language learning. She explained that we often take listening for granted because we hear things all the time. But truly listening, actively and purposefully, is different. Active listening is about focusing on understanding the message, not just the words. This requires engaging with the content, paying attention to pronunciation, intonation, and even the pauses between words. It's not just about recognizing words, but also about understanding how those words fit together to convey meaning. Our teacher's advice was to start with simple English books that have an audio version. This approach has multiple benefits. First, reading along with the audio allows you to connect the spoken and written forms of the language. It helps reinforce vocabulary and pronunciation. When you read a book on your own, you might mispronounce some words, but when you hear them being spoken correctly, your brain learns the proper sounds. Listening while reading also allows you to internalize sentence structures and grammatical rules in context. It gives you the chance to understand how native speakers naturally form sentences, which you can then use in your own speaking and writing. She encouraged us to choose books that are simple but interesting to keep us motivated. Using audio versions is especially useful for beginners because it provides a model for correct pronunciation and helps familiarize you with the rhythm and flow of the language. A great place to start is with books or stories that are specifically designed for language learners. Websites like newsandlevels.com offer content that is tailored to different levels of English learners. This makes it easier for you to find material that matches your current ability while gradually challenging you as you improve. Once you get comfortable with simple materials, it's time to step up the challenge. Our teacher advised watching films and videos, a strategy that many people overlook. Watching films isn't just about entertainment. It's an excellent way to improve your listening skills. Films expose you to natural conversations in different contexts, and they help you understand how English is spoken in real life. One of the first things to keep in mind is to watch with subtitles initially. This helps you understand the meaning of what is being said. Even if you miss a word or two, the subtitles provide the visual cue that fills in the gaps when your listening skills are still developing. However, the real magic happens when you watch the same film or video again, but this time without the subtitles. This forces you to focus solely on listening. Without the help of subtitles, you begin to train your brain to rely more on the audio, honing your ability to catch the meanings of words in context. Over time, you'll become less dependent on visual cues and rely more on auditory processing, which significantly improves listening comprehension. The key here is repetition. The more times you watch or listen to the same content, the more familiar the words and phrases become. This repeated exposure helps your brain internalize the vocabulary, idiomatic expressions, and different ways of speaking that you may not have noticed the first time around. Our teacher suggested that if you love a particular film, you should watch it multiple times. When you watch something repeatedly, not only do you reinforce your listening ability, but you also begin to understand the nuances of the language. This kind of deep familiarity will help you speak more fluently over time. Films, TV shows, and videos are not just for beginners. They are useful for all levels, from those just starting to learn the language to advanced speakers. There are many genres to choose from, and each type of film or video offers different language learning opportunities. For example, nature documentaries can introduce you to formal language and scientific terms, while reality shows or talk shows often feature more casual language and colloquialisms. Watching a variety of different content helps you expand your vocabulary and get used to the diversity of language used in everyday life. The importance of consistency cannot be overstated. Our teacher suggested making listening practice a daily habit, even if it's only for 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes may not seem like much, but when practiced every day, it can make a huge difference over time. Consistency helps your brain stay engaged and allows you to absorb new information bit by bit. Imagine how much your listening skills can improve if you commit to this routine every day for a month. You'll begin to notice that you can understand English much better, not just in films or audio, but in real-life conversations as well. Listening practice doesn't have to be limited to just books or films. Podcasts are another excellent tool for language learners. Podcasts are easy to access, often cover interesting topics, and can be listened to on the go. They come in different levels of difficulty, so you can choose one that suits your current skill level. Many language learning podcasts include exercises and tips specifically designed to improve listening. Podcasts are particularly useful for developing your listening skills in specific contexts. For example, you can find podcasts focused on business English, daily conversations, or specific cultural topics, which allows you to learn vocabulary and expressions relevant to different situations. In addition to all these methods, our teacher reminded us that the goal of improving our listening skills is not just to understand spoken English better, but also to become more confident speakers. When you understand what people are saying, you're in a better position to respond appropriately. This takes us to the next point in our language learning journey: how listening helps improve your speaking skills. If you want to be fluent in English, you can't just focus on speaking or writing. You need to give equal attention to listening. Listening is the foundation of effective communication, and without it, your speaking skills will be limited. Moreover, improving your listening can help you develop your pronunciation and accent. By hearing how native speakers pronounce words, you can mimic their sounds and rhythm, which leads to clearer, more natural speech. Listening to a variety of speakers will also help you understand different accents and dialects, which is especially useful in today's globalized world. Whether you're interacting with people from different parts of the world or watching international news, understanding various accents is an essential skill. The more time you dedicate to listening, the more your brain becomes accustomed to the sounds and patterns of English. This will make you more comfortable when it's your turn to speak. You'll find that when it's time for you to engage in a conversation, you will be able to do so with greater ease. Listening to English consistently helps train your mind to think in English, which in turn helps you speak with greater fluency and confidence. As you progress in your language learning journey, remember that it's important to stay patient with yourself. Listening takes time, and it's okay to miss words or misunderstand parts of a conversation. With practice, you'll gradually improve, and soon you'll be able to understand English speakers with ease. The key is to keep listening, keep practicing, and never give up. Now that we've established the importance of listening and some practical ways to improve your listening skills, you might be wondering how all of this can lead to better speaking. Let's explore how listening not only enhances your understanding, but also contributes to becoming a more confident speaker of English. With the right listening habits, you'll soon notice how seamlessly your ability to speak improves as you start picking up the patterns and phrases you hear in everyday conversations. When the teacher asked the class why we first started learning English, it felt like an important question, one that would reveal not just our individual reasons, but also how each of us connected with the language on a personal level. I raised my hand, eager to share my story. It's funny how a simple question like that can make you reflect on a journey you hadn't really thought about for a while. My connection with English started out rocky. In fact, when I was younger, I didn't like it at all. To me, English was just a subject in school, something to be learned because it was required, not because it was something I had any particular passion for. At that time, English seemed confusing, filled with strange rules and exceptions that didn't make sense. I struggled with it, and for a long time, I couldn't see any reason to care about it beyond just passing exams. There was nothing about it that made me excited or curious. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to learn it for fun, or even for any deeper purpose. I was like many other students who simply went through the motions of learning English because it was part of the curriculum. I remember sitting in my classroom, glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until the English lesson was over. It was just another part of my day that I had to get through. But everything changed when I turned 20. It wasn't some big dramatic event that shifted my perspective, but rather a small, simple thing that gradually grew into something more meaningful. One day, I found myself listening to a song by Taylor Swift. I had always heard her music in the background of various places, but this time, Something about the song caught my attention. I was curious about the lyrics, about what they meant. I wanted to understand the words more deeply, to fully grasp the emotions behind them. So I started translating them, slowly, word by word, trying to figure out the meaning. At first it was frustrating. I didn't know much English, and translating every line felt like a puzzle I was trying to solve. But as I continued, I found that there was something oddly satisfying about it. I could feel myself learning, not just because I had to, but because I actually wanted to understand. Slowly but surely, my vocabulary grew, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. It wasn't about grammar or memorizing vocabulary anymore. It was about feeling connected to something bigger. The music became a bridge for me to understand English in a way that felt personal and authentic. That's when something incredible happened. One day, I was on a train, traveling somewhere for a short trip, when I met two tourists from America. They were friendly and kind, and we started talking. It was a simple conversation, but it was a huge moment for me. For the first time, I realized that the English I had been learning wasn't just a series of words and rules on a page. It was a real language that real people spoke. And here I was, talking to them. Not perfectly, but enough to understand and be understood. That small interaction filled me with hope. It made me believe that my efforts to learn English were not in vain. It gave me a reason to keep going, to keep pushing myself to learn, to improve, and to eventually speak fluently. Our teacher's response to the class discussion was simple but profound. Motivation changes everything. When you care about English, whether it's songs, books, or people, it becomes easier to learn. His words stuck with me because they explained something I hadn't realized before. Motivation is the key that unlocks the door to learning a language. It's not just about studying words or grammar rules. It's about finding something that excites you, something that makes you care enough to keep going, even when it gets tough. For me, that motivation came from music, and the chance to connect with others in a way I hadn't experienced before. I looked around the classroom as other students shared their own stories, and I could see that everyone had their own reasons for learning English. Some of my classmates wanted to get jobs abroad, hoping that knowing English would open up opportunities for them to work in international companies. Others dreamed of traveling the world and exploring new cultures, with English as the common language that could help them communicate no matter where they went. Some of my friends wanted to read books in their original language without needing translations. Their reasons were different from mine, but the underlying theme was the same. English was a tool, a bridge to a bigger world. It wasn't just about learning a language. It was about the doors it could open, the new opportunities it could provide. I realized that English wasn't just a subject in school, but a key to a world that was waiting to be explored. It could connect me to people from different backgrounds, allow me to access knowledge and experiences that were previously out of reach, and even help me share my own thoughts and ideas with others. As I listened to my classmates, I began to see the many different ways that English could play a role in our lives. That day in class, I started to see English in a new light. It wasn't something that I had to do. It was something that I could choose to embrace. It was a tool that could help me connect with others, to share my thoughts, and to explore the world. It was more than just words. It was the possibility of new experiences, new friendships, and a wider understanding of the world around me. And yet, I also knew that motivation alone wasn't enough to guarantee success. It wasn't enough to simply want to learn. I needed a way to stay on track, to keep pushing myself, even when the going got tough. It became clear that motivation needed to be paired with consistency, with a desire to improve even when it felt hard or frustrating. The question I had to ask myself was, how could I keep the momentum going? How could I make sure that the motivation I felt in that moment would carry me forward, not just for a few weeks, but for the long haul? The answer to that question, I began to realize, lay not just in the reasons we have for learning, but in the way we approach the process itself. Motivation was the spark, but it was the strategies we used to learn that would keep the fire burning. Whether it was setting small goals, finding engaging ways to practice, or simply surrounding myself with people who spoke English, I realized that there were steps I could take to make sure I didn't lose that initial spark of motivation. As we talked in class, I realized that every person's journey to learning English was unique. It was personal, shaped by individual experiences, interests, and goals. But the one thing we all had in common was that we were all motivated to learn for different reasons, and that motivation was the driving force that kept us moving forward. I began to think about the next steps on my own journey, wondering how I could maintain that sense of excitement and keep pushing myself toward fluency. The teacher's words about motivation stayed with me long after that class. I began to focus on the things that motivated me the most, like music, travel, and connecting with people. I started setting small goals for myself, like learning a certain number of new words each week or watching an English language movie without subtitles. These small victories helped me build confidence and kept me engaged in the process. I found that motivation alone wasn't enough to carry me through. I needed to make learning fun, to keep it fresh and exciting. As I continued on my journey, I realized that learning English wasn't just about mastering a language. It was about connecting with the world, expanding my horizons, and discovering new opportunities. It was a lifelong journey, one that would continue to evolve as I learned and grew. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the question wasn't just about why we start learning English, but about how we can keep learning and growing. How can we stay motivated, stay curious, and keep pushing ourselves to reach new heights? That's when I realized the true beauty of learning English. It's not just about what you achieve at the end, it's about the journey itself. And that journey, I knew, you learning a new language, especially one with as vast a vocabulary as English, can seem like an overwhelming task. The idea of needing to learn 3,000 words may cause some anxiety, but it's not as daunting as it first seems. A student named Oprah Winfrey once raised a very relevant question in class. How can we find and learn these 3,000 words? Her question sparked an insightful discussion that not only answered her query, but also revealed some crucial learning strategies that would make the process both efficient and enjoyable. The first thing our teacher emphasized was that relying solely on lists of words that we find online isn't the best approach. While word lists are useful for very basic vocabulary, think simple words like apple, dog, or water. They are not the most effective tool for learning more complicated words. Words like appreciate or suppose require more than just rote memorization. They need to be understood in context. Simply reading a list and trying to memorize it won't help us grasp how these words are used in everyday language, and it certainly won't make them stick in our long-term memory. Our teacher pointed out that memorizing words without understanding how to use them leads to a shallow understanding of the language, and that's something we want to avoid. Instead of focusing on word lists, our teacher suggested that we turn to something far more practical, reading books, particularly those written in simple English. There are plenty of stories and novels that are adapted to suit learners of different levels, and these books can introduce us to thousands of words naturally. One excellent example she gave was Robinson Crusoe, a novel by Daniel Defoe, which has been rewritten in simpler language for learners. The story is not only engaging, but also filled with rich vocabulary, and it provides readers with the opportunity to see how words are used in context. Similarly, The Little Prince, written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, is another story that has been simplified for English learners, and it is equally rich in meaningful vocabulary. These stories aren't just for entertainment, they're essential for expanding our vocabulary. As we read, we come across new words repeatedly, which makes them easier to learn. The beauty of this method is that it introduces words in context, meaning we learn not just the meaning of the word, but also how it functions within a sentence. For example, reading the phrase, "The little prince looked up at the stars," we can understand the meaning of looked up from the context. This type of learning is much more powerful than memorizing word lists, because it's tied to real-world usage. Our teacher emphasized that one important rule for vocabulary acquisition is repetition. The words that matter the most will show up again and again in the stories and articles we read. As we encounter these words repeatedly in different contexts, we begin to remember them without even realizing it. It's like a cycle. Read, encounter new words, encounter them again, and then slowly begin to use them in our own speech and writing. This repetition doesn't feel like a chore because it's happening naturally within the flow of a compelling story. It's much more fun and effective than sitting down with a dry list of words to memorize. But she also reminded us that it's important not to rush through the reading. We should take the time to pause and reflect on the words that are unfamiliar. If a word pops up that we don't understand, we should stop and try to guess its meaning from the context. Often, there are clues within the sentence, such as descriptive words or actions, that help us figure out the meaning. If we still don't know, we can look it up in a dictionary or online and try to use it in our own sentences to reinforce the meaning. This kind of active learning is far more powerful than passive reading. Another suggestion our teacher gave was to read books that are slightly above our current level. While it's important to read books that are simple enough to understand, We should also challenge ourselves by picking up books that introduce new and unfamiliar vocabulary. This can push us out of our comfort zone and help us encounter more sophisticated language. However, the key is not to jump into books that are too difficult. Instead, we should gradually increase the complexity of the texts we read. Over time, we'll build a robust vocabulary that covers a wide range of situations, from casual conversations to more formal discussions. To make this process even more efficient, our teacher recommended that we keep a vocabulary journal. Whenever we come across a new word, we should write it down along with its meaning and a sentence that uses the word. This journal serves as a record of the words we've learned and gives us a place to refer back to when we need to refresh our memory. Writing the word down helps reinforce it in our memory, and creating a sentence using the word helps us understand how it functions in context. Over time, our vocabulary journal will become an invaluable resource for learning new words. Another important point our teacher made was that learning vocabulary isn't just about memorizing words. It's about understanding how to use them in real life. So, after encountering a new word in a book, it's essential to start incorporating it into our speech and writing. The more we use a word, the more likely we are to remember it. We can challenge ourselves to use new words in our daily conversations, whether we're speaking with friends, writing in our journal, or even when we're thinking to ourselves. This will help make the new vocabulary a part of our natural speech. Our teacher also discussed the importance of exposure. The more we expose ourselves to the language, the more words we will encounter. In addition to reading books, we can also listen to podcasts, watch movies or TV shows in English, or even engage in conversations with native speakers. Every bit of exposure helps us pick up new words and see how they're used in different contexts. For example, if we watch a movie where characters are discussing their emotions, we'll learn not just the vocabulary for emotions, but also the subtle nuances of how to express those emotions in English. This kind of real-world exposure is invaluable for developing fluency. Finally, our teacher reminded us that there's no shortcut to mastering vocabulary. It's a gradual process that requires patience and persistence. We can't expect to learn 3,000 words overnight, and that's okay. The goal is to focus on steady progress and to be consistent in our learning. As we continue reading, listening, and speaking, we will accumulate more and more words, and over time, we will find ourselves thinking and expressing ourselves in English with greater ease. The key is to stay motivated and keep learning. So when Oprah asked how to find and learn these 3,000 words, the answer was clear. It's not about memorizing a list. It's about reading books, engaging with the language in context, and constantly exposing ourselves to new words. By following these strategies, we can not only learn 3,000 words, but also become fluent speakers of English. This method will ensure that we are not just learning words, but also learning how to use them in meaningful, practical ways. Now, as we continue our journey of expanding our vocabulary, it's important to remember that language learning is not a race. It's a long, steady process that rewards consistency and effort. By reading books in simple English, repeating words, keeping a vocabulary journal, and exposing ourselves to the language in a variety of ways, we will build a vocabulary that will serve us well in both written and spoken communication. With this approach, we can approach the challenge of learning 3,000 words with confidence and excitement. And as we get more comfortable with the vocabulary we learn, we'll be ready for the next step in mastering English, using that vocabulary in real-world conversations. As far from over by the end of the week, I found myself excited about something that wasn't just the English language anymore. I was getting ready to play soccer with the school team, and it felt like a perfect way to wrap up the week I had spent working on my English. The thing with soccer is that it's a sport where practice and patience really matter. You can't expect to be great after one day of training or after just a few practices. It's the same with English. It's about building over time, piece by piece. Even if you don't see the full picture right away, you have to put in the effort and show up day after day. That's how improvement happens, both in sports and in learning a language. The soccer match turned out to be an exciting game. We were up against a strong team, and the competition was fierce. But the more we played, the more I felt the connection with my teammates. The coordination, the communication, and the trust we had in each other made a huge difference. In that moment, I saw a parallel to my language journey. Just like in soccer, where each player has to trust and rely on others to win the game, learning English requires the same trust in the process. You need to trust that every little step you take, every new word you learn, every sentence you form, it's all part of the bigger picture that you're building for yourself. After the match, we celebrated at a local cafe. The win felt good, but what I cherished most was the sense of camaraderie and achievement with my teammates. It wasn't just the goal-scoring moments that stood out. It was the entire process of working together, strategizing, encouraging each other, and pushing ourselves to improve. As I sat there sipping on my drink and chatting with the team, I couldn't help but reflect on how this whole experience was similar to learning English. You go through the motions, practicing, trying, failing, and trying again, but in the end, it's all worth it because you improve, just like we did in that match. As I sat with my teammates, I realized something even more profound. English, just like soccer, is not only about individual success, it's also about communication and connection. While playing soccer, you can't win if you don't work with your teammates. You have to communicate, coordinate, and work together. Similarly, in the world of English, you can't just learn it alone. You need to read, listen, speak, and interact with others. You need to build that foundation brick by brick by engaging with English in different ways, whether it's talking to friends, reading stories, or even having conversations with strangers. As the days went by, I started noticing how much easier things were becoming. At work, for example, I found myself understanding my customers better. I was able to respond more confidently and clearly. Conversations flowed more naturally, and I didn't feel nervous about making mistakes as I had before. It was as if my practice had paid off, and I could now see the rewards of my hard work. The sense of progress felt amazing, and it reminded me that language learning isn't just about knowing a bunch of words. It's about communication, connection, and confidence. It's about building a foundation where you can express yourself without fear. I realized that English wasn't just something I had to do. It was something I wanted to do. The more I practiced, the more enjoyable it became. The books I read, the podcasts I listened to, the shows I watched, it all became part of a bigger experience that I wasn't just doing out of obligation, but out of interest. I was developing a love for the language, and it was no longer a task or a chore. It was a journey I wanted to continue on. That's when I understood how important it is to find your personal motivation for learning English. For me, it wasn't just about passing exams or being good at work. It was about being able to connect with others, to share stories, to understand the world better, and to feel a sense of accomplishment. Everyone has their own reason for learning a language, and it's crucial to discover that reason. When you have a purpose behind your efforts, everything becomes much easier and more enjoyable. In the days that followed, I made a habit of listening to English every day, even if it was just for a few minutes. I read stories, I practiced speaking with friends, and I worked on learning new words. And slowly, I could see the difference. My vocabulary grew, my understanding deepened, and I began to feel more at ease in conversations. I realized that just like sports, learning English requires patience. You don't see dramatic progress every day, but over time, the improvements add up. The key is to keep going, even when it feels hard or slow. Sometimes I'd find myself thinking about the mistakes I made, but instead of being discouraged, I would remind myself that making mistakes was part of the process. Just like in soccer, where every missed shot or bad pass teaches you something, every mistake in English was a chance to learn and grow. I began to see mistakes as stepping stones, not failures, and that made all the difference. It gave me the confidence to keep going, to try again, and to know that every attempt was one step closer to fluency. As I continued on my English learning journey, I found that the most important thing was consistency. It wasn't about practicing for hours on end, but about doing a little bit each day. Just like training for a sport, you can't expect to become great overnight, but if you commit to practicing regularly, you will improve. The small steps, the daily habits, and the constant effort will lead to progress over time. And so, I reached a point where English didn't feel like something I was forcing myself to do anymore. It had become a natural part of my life. I was reading stories, listening to podcasts, watching movies in English, and even thinking in English at times. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I had built a foundation, and I was continuing to grow. The process itself had become enjoyable, and I felt confident that I could handle whatever challenges came my way. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success in learning English was the same as in playing soccer: practice, patience, and progress. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to keep going. With each step, no matter how small, you're getting closer to your goal. Whether it's improving your English skills or becoming a better soccer player, the process is all about persistence. And that's something worth celebrating. So if you want to speak English confidently, keep practicing. Read stories. Listen every day. and find a reason to love the language. With time, the progress will come, and you'll look back and see just how far you've come. As I wrapped up my thoughts, I remembered the simple truth that had helped me throughout my journey. Consistency is key. In the end, it's not about rushing the process, but enjoying the ride, knowing that each small effort is building towards something bigger. And just like that, I was not just learning English, I was living it. If you enjoyed this story and want more tips on learning English the fun and smart way, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to English Tone for more inspiring and helpful videos every week. Let us know in the comments, what motivates you to learn English? We'd love to hear your story.